Also, I don't see anybody that is under 18, but if you are, please let us know. We do have to turn your camera off. So yeah, I'll introduce myself. I am Seth Snoap, he, him, his. I'm the Men as Allies coordinator at Resilience Advocates for Ending Violence here in Holland, Michigan. Yeah, main speakers, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Rolando Tompkins Jones. I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Social Justice Education at Grand Valley State University.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, everybody. Glad that you're joining us. My name is Brandon Melnick. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Youth Development Specialist at Arbor Circle.
Sweet.
Good morning. My name is Brad Hefia, he, him, his pronouns. I'm a trauma therapist at Resilience Advocates for Ending Violence. I have my bachelor's in women, gender, and sexuality studies from Grand Valley, go Lakers, and my master in social work.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, fellas. I do want to give a shout out to Leslie. She is the one basically emceeing this whole thing, and she's going to be typing in the chat for us as well. So I wanted to thank her. Oh, yep, there she is. Awesome. So yeah, this is the final conversation of a 5-week series. If you're new, welcome. If you've been here, the entire time, awesome. I'm glad you can stick it out and you didn't get, annoyed or bored with us. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about allyship, and more specifically, what does being an ally look for men? And so before we get into that conversation, does anyone want to sum up kind of what we talked about last week a little bit?
I got us. So last week we were talking about vulnerability and authenticity, and how in the man box, that's not really an option. Being vulnerable, being authentic, it really goes against the entire system of manhood. And that's why it's a threat, right? It exposes the system as being fragile, and it exposes the privileges that are within it. And so when you're vulnerable and authentic, it's that risk, and you can actually experience threats or violence or abuse if you were to step outside that man box. So we talked about like why it's really hard, but also why it's dangerous for a lot of people, and what we can do to change that, to embrace vulnerability, having conversations, building relationships, so that we can kind of fight that system from within.
Awesome. Thank you. And to just kind of go off of that, how does last week's conversations about vulnerability and authenticity tie into this week's conversation of allyship and how men can show up as allies?
I think our conversation last week about vulnerability has some pretty direct ties into being an ally, because it does in some way require us to continue. I think a part of being vulnerable is to continue to recognize ourselves as being part of the problem. So there's something that I pulled up here that I've seen in relationship to particularly white allies who would be allies for racial justice work. But there are a few things here that I also think have some important, just are important to put out there for what we're talking about today. So we have we are in many ways a particular liability in this work, but then we also have specific and critical roles. It can be, or it can feel humiliating, or it can be very vulnerable to not have participated and taken any actions before. But then at the same time, in order to grow, we need to take actions. when we're working on ending oppression that we benefit from directly, we can expect that people may mistrust us, and that's all right, and that's where we are. Um, and then it's also important for us to bring other people along in this work that we're doing too, in terms of trying to be allies as well. We need to hear from the folks who are closest to the pain, and we also need to take initiative and develop our own scope and lens to determine what actions we need to take. And so I think, and there are many more things here, but a lot of that I think requires vulnerability. It requires us to really recognize that this is something that is to be done with people and not for people. And throughout all of that, continuing to remember that we are directly implicated in it. And so working on ourselves as we try to bring other folks along with us.
Yeah, you said so many great things, but I like how you started off with, we have to be vulnerable and open enough with ourselves to kind of take that introspective look and say, this is what I'm benefiting from. Those agents of oppression that, we're fighting against, we are benefiting directly from those systems. So how are we gonna kind of break down those walls inside of us before we try and break down the walls for other people? So I like how you started off with saying we got to take a look in ourselves first before we start looking to other people. So I'm gonna kind of back up a little bit, because we kind of just dove head first into it, which I love. But does anyone, and this is for the audience as well, so please answer in the chat, but what does an ally, what does being an ally mean? What is an ally? What does that word mean? What does it look like? Just in the general, sense.
I also very much appreciate the scope that you brought to the table, just in what you were saying, Rolando. So thank you for that. Somebody has a question for you in the chat box, so I'll let you answer that. But bring my thoughts to the question you asked, Seth. What does an ally look like? To me, what an ally could look like many, many different things to different people. But in order to be an ally, first and foremost, you need to be vulnerable with yourself, right? We need to fix ourselves before we fix other people. And I say fix to assist, to empower, to challenge, not in a negative way, but in a positive way. Because if we believe that as an individual, everything we're doing is the way that it should be, that is an incorrect mindset, and it's not going to bring you any allyship. But if you're able to be vulnerable and open about yourself, recognizing that, hey, I am imperfect, but I'm working to improve and getting better, then allyship can look like, hey, I'm reading books or reading literature, or I'm donating. I'm recognizing that marginalized populations have a huge part in the world, and I'm benefiting from that, even if I don't know that I'm aware of it. It can look like that. As long as I read something, it doesn't matter how you're going forward. It matters that you're going forward. Keep your foot on the pedal in your allyship. So, I mean, allyship can look a lot of different ways. But I also think it's important to recognize that you don't get to declare yourself an ally. Like, that's not a label that you can put on yourself. That's not a title that you give onto yourself. The community who you believe you are an ally for will bestow it on you. They will recognize you. Maybe bestow is a little bit strong of a word, but like, you'll know that you're an ally to community XYZ, because they'll let you know, they'll appreciate your efforts, they'll recognize that. But I want to, so it's kind of similar to some people, they give themselves a nickname. It's like, no, you need to like earn that nickname, right? an ally is like a step further because it means something. It means that you are actually really, you're vulnerable with yourself, but that the community who you are being an ally for, an ally with, recognizes your really patronage, recognizes your efforts, recognizes your energy, and then it's fulfilling, you know, when they're like, oh yeah, this is what I was looking for. So to me, that's what allyship can look like.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You jumped ahead with so many great points. So I love how we're just hitting on all of them right away. But thank you for everyone who's typing in the chat. And so you had some great things to say. Being an ally means, you know, your support, you're a friend, you're an advocate, you have common goals, right? Redistribution of resources and power. Absolutely. Understanding your own privilege first, right? Like we've all been saying, we have to take that look inside before we can start doing the work on the outside. Understanding that there is intersectionality and supporting and being a voice while putting any privilege and bias in check. Absolutely. I love this. It's allyship is a skill set, right? Yep. Kind of like what Brandon was saying is it's not just a name tag that like, oh, I was an ally for one day, I can slap it on and now I'm an ally for life. And I was going to get to this later, but a great quote was kind of like how people use, oh, I'm going to like, what about your man card, right? I'm going to take away your man card. Well, I'm going to take away your ally card. You have to earn that card each and every single day. So it's not just I wake up and I'm an ally. No, I wake up, I put in the work, and then I can claim that ally card at the end of the day. Awesome. An ally means showing up, listening, being willing to step up or stay out of the way depending on what it's needed. Absolutely. And I like how you say stay out of the way depending on what is needed. And we're going to kind of get into that in a little bit, being male identified, mostly working with domestic violence and sexual assault. It's keeping your voice and your privilege in check. We'll get into that in a little bit. So we're going to kind of jump back. There was a great question for you, Rolando. I don't know if you see it in the chat, but it says, are there similarities or differences in the approach you described involved in being a male ally in gender issues compared to being a white ally in race issues?
I think there are some similarities there, as well as differences. I think the main thing, at least that I'm keeping in mind in this moment, is as we, you know, learn, act, or take action, trying to act in solidarity of other groups, is just to always remain in this space of critical reflection. I mean, like there are plenty of reasons for even those of us who are on this panel are situated in different ways. And so, you know, if we were to take an inventory, there are plenty of, I think, touch points in which we may have some intersecting issues in terms of being privileged, but then there are also some spaces even where I would need some help, or where I might need to help another person. And so depending on how I'm situated. And so I think there are some similarities there, but putting ourselves I think at the center in terms of thinking about the places of privilege where we sit, and working on that and being reflective about that is important, but then removing ourselves when it things like whose voices are more important, and those types of things. We were just talking about before we got on the panel, you know, what we were going to do for 4th of July. You know, I have a very complicated, but personally, just being in my own experience of having a Black body, I have a very complicated history with the 4th of July here. Other folks might not have that complicated history. And I think similar points of reflection are required when it comes to thinking about being allies along issues that involve race and gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, a variety of other things. Ability for us all to be really thinking about, who we are and how power can shift when it comes to the different conversations that we're having and what our roles can be. So I do think there are some similarities. It does require vulnerability, as we talked about earlier. But if we can just recognize that or embrace those complications, I think that'll make us, or at least I feel like in the context of this conversation, I'll be more useful if I can embrace the complications of recognizing that I do have a role, but then also there are times when I need to move to the side. So I think Seth, as you were saying, someone really, I'm trying to find the comment amongst the chat, but really elevated that piece too, depending on the situation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well said. And we're kind of going to get into this, but I think when looking at being an ally, especially a white cisgendered male, a lot of the times I have to remind myself, like, I have to be very intentional that I'm eager to listen first and slow to speak. So it's just listening to like you were saying, the marginalized voices, the people who we are trying to be an ally for. Listen to them first, listen to what they have to say, let them lead, and then allow myself to kind of join alongside them. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. And so I know we're kind of jumping all around, but this conversation is already surpassing my expectations. So super excited about that. But to kind of tie into the first week and kind of why we've been having this conversation is to look at these large issues through the male lens, right? And so that's the kind of direction I want to take it is, what does the man box say about, being an ally? What does the man box say about caring about these issues that are around us, caring about the marginalized in society? What does the man box teach us about how to be an ally, if it does at all?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think it's important to realize, like, the man box exists because it's oppressing others who don't fit into that box, right? So there is no room for allyship within the man box, right? The man box doesn't exist if we abolish these systems of oppression and redistribute power and practice intersectionality every day. So it's really important, like what Brandon was saying a couple weeks ago about how we need to unlearn and relearn. One thing that we have to unlearn is this selfishness, this isolation that is within the man box, that's very individual. And Rolando talked about last week too with community. So we have to, like, unlearn that individualism and instead focus more on community, focus more on being empathetic, focus more on trusting others, being vulnerable. All these things are tying together so that we can put allyship into practice. It's one thing to talk about it, but we actually have to show up and do it. And it requires all these things that we're talking about, all these things that we're building. So it's really about abolishing this traditional man box and instead being more community driven, empathetic, vulnerable, and caring about everybody and their intersectional, unique identities, not just your own. I think that's a really important part of this.
Absolutely. Other thoughts?
So I'm looking at the call to action guide here, and in one diagram that the Center Resilience that you all put together, and one diagram of the man box that's reflected here, it has words in there like protector, strong decision maker, dominating, in charge, aggressive. And so I think when I'm thinking about the question, like, what does the man box teach us about being an ally, in some ways, or in many ways, just as what's described, there's that individualism. There's also like this centering of ourselves as if we have the answers, and it's like a savior complex. That there's another side of this ally thing that that can be dangerous as well. And so that's why I was really thinking in my comments earlier, just continuing to reflect, being mindful of the positions that we hold, but not putting ourselves as the sole like solution people, but recognizing that we have a place, and then realizing when we don't, or realizing when we need to shift and move to. Yeah, because I'm just thinking, I'm wondering how folks feel, because in many ways, you know, sometimes I do have some real complicated feelings and frustrations when folks who are allies, and in this conversation, I'm also implicating myself, say and do things who have been marginalized have been saying for the longest time, and it's not received and mentioned in the same ways or accepted in the same ways. So that's another part of the complications there. But I think there's a danger in relying on that man box and leaning too heavily into those roles. Like, and again, I'm just looking at these words like protector and dominating and decision maker, trying to become the expert in it, and benefiting from that too. So I think if anything that the man box can teach us, or does teach people, if we're not careful, is to internalize that we're the only ones who can, who have something to say about this and who can do something about it. When work has been and is being done by folks who are marginalized.
I really appreciated how you kind of flipped allyship and say it's not a savior complex. And oftentimes when, like myself being a male talking about gender issues, I have to be very intentional and not to think that way. Like not to think that because I'm doing this work, now it's going to end, right? Because I'm doing this work, now things are going to change. And so you have to be very intentional. And I like how you brought that into it. And there was a really good comment. The box also interprets everything in the world, power, attention, love, joy, as a finite resource, and everyone's gain as white, straight, cis, het men's loss, when it absolutely does not have to be. And I like how you said that it's like power is like a finite resource. Box teaches us men to like hoard power, because it teaches us that it's a finite resource. So we're trying to reach out and grab as much power for ourselves. And when you're an ally, you have to surrender that, right? And so I think the man box ultimately teaches us that we need to hoard this finite power for ourselves, and we can't let anyone else have it.
I mean, I think about I think about professors, other public folks who have received a lot of attention for being allies, and then I mean, even some folks who have contributed to the body of knowledge around what it means to be an ally as cisgender men, have later been found out, you know, to have some abusive behaviors as well. And so that's why I'm saying, like, it's just always important to be just reflective of that. Yeah, we're not the stars here, you know.
I love that. We're not the stars. I'm actually going to write that down. Brandon, any thoughts?
Sorry. No, Brad, Rolando, great insight. Essentially, what we're getting at is the man box says what we want. We need to do the opposite of what the man box is saying, for the sake of the community, for the betterment of community and us. Please, it's not an easy task. Allyship's not an easy task. Becoming better, not an easy task. Everything is a process. I firmly believe that it is well worth it, though, to become better as a person, to become on different relational levels, to become a better, to first become an ally of whatever communities you want to be an ally for, and then to become a better ally. I firmly believe that, but well put, Brad, well put, Rolando. And Seth, yes.
Yeah. So the next direction, if we're saying that basically being an ally and caring for the ones like around you is the way to go, why is it so hard for men to step into that ally role? I know we talked about the man box a little bit, but why don't we see more men on conversations like this, or more men doing the work that we do, or men just having these conversations with one another? If clearly a lot of people want to talk about it, we've had consistent 30 people on this call every week. If a lot of people want to have these conversations about consent, about healthy relationships, about what manhood really means, why aren't men stepping up and being those allies? And that was a question for the audience as well. Sorry, not just the main speakers. So if you want to answer that, why aren't men, speaking out? Why aren't men standing up? Why aren't men jumping into their roles as allies?
Well, I think, again, for me, I always look at the system, right? The big macro level, and manhood, masculinity is a system that gives or takes away privilege and power, depending on who you are, what your identities are. And so for a lot of overprivileged men, white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied men, I think allyship means you're trying to abolish the system. You're challenging the system that is giving you power by taking other people's power away. And I think that right there is where people get really uncomfortable. That's where they think about, what would my life look like if I didn't have these privileges? And they get scared. Or maybe it's even worse than that. And it's not necessarily that they're scared, but they like their life. They like that there aren't as many obstacles and hardships, and they want to keep it that way. But when we're talking about systems change, and that's what this really is, the people that have privilege are, it's because there are people that are being marginalized. And so when we take that on, that privilege that people have has to be abolished as well, right? We're talking about equity here, not equality. So it's about abolishing those systems of oppression and redistributing power so that it benefits everybody. And I think right there is where there's a lot of people that will be willfully ignorant. I don't want to know about this. I don't want to take part in this because I don't want my life to be any more difficult. I like the privileges that I have, and I want to keep those. And I think that's a really, really big issue that a lot of privileged men, a lot of issues that they have, and we need to talk about that. And it's up to people that have that privilege to talk to those people and use our privilege to fight the system from within.
Yeah, I like the term, and I know someone in the chat also used the term, but that term uncomfortable, right? Being an ally, and especially an ally that gains the benefits from that systemic problem, it's uncomfortable to look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, no, for 18, 19, 20 years of my life, I benefited from this. And I have to come to terms with some of the BS that I did as a teenager, or I did before I found out about the man box, before I started down my journey of allyship. But that uncomfortableness is what allows us to grow, because we can identify the more negative behaviors, more negative beliefs. Yeah.
Hi, folks. Excuse me. This is Jaime Alvarado. I'm, excuse me. So one of the things that is at play here is that I know that I think Seth commented that it's heartening to see 30 plus people on these calls every week. A couple things about that. One is that from what I can tell, majority of people are on the call are women, and relatively few men, and that's pretty telling. And so, while there may be a lot of people, and men particularly, who want to have these conversations, the vast majority of men still don't. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of men are still completely unaware of their privilege from patriarchy, and completely unaware. And so, and I'm talking about teenagers and also men. I mean, there's, like in my case, I didn't come to any consciousness until I was in my 50s. And so I think the question for me remains is, like, how do you engage men who don't have that analysis and are completely unaware of our own behaviors, and how that, in effect, we, what do you call that? We subject women and others to other forms of violence that we didn't perceive to be violence. You know what I mean? And I think that's the ongoing big question that we need to answer. How do we engage men who are completely oblivious to it all?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your input. And yeah, so I'm going to open that question to everybody, is how do we bring men to the table, right? How do we engage men in this conversation? If we ourselves as men are allies, how do we engage other men to join us in our journey through allyship and our journey through breaking down the man box and recognizing what is more abusive or what is more unhealthy?
All right, I'll start. Thank you, Jaime, for your input and having your voice heard. And I think that's really, quite honestly, it's the elephant in the room, right? And how do we first get men to recognize, hey, what you're doing is wrong, unlearn years and years of systemic injustices, but you're doing, like, that's not on an individual, I don't believe. It's on the systems that are in place, those oppressive systems that are in place. Because telling a person that, hey, what you're doing is wrong, isn't something that's easy. It's uncomfortable, but part of this whole process is you need to push your boundaries and recognize, is it worth doing the same things that I have been doing, that I as just humans have been doing, rather than I as an individual have been doing? Is it worth it to even just try something new, not knowing what it's going to look like? I believe it is. I believe that most of us on here, I don't want to speak for you. You each have your own voice, but I believe that we recognize that those positive changes are very well worth the effort, the time, the energy, to becoming better. But quite honestly, to engage men in that conversation, you're going to have to face that it is a process. Probably not going to go well from the start. What we are trying to do, Seth, you're not going to like, I'm jumping ahead, but the call to action team that we're part of is engaging the West Michigan community in first of all recognizing, hey, these are what actions our actions as men are leading to sexual assault and domestic violence, and that is not a good thing. like point blank, it's not a good thing. Without reading off the countless data, we understand that it's not a good thing. And then what role do you have in that? So education is super, super important, and point out, people don't know they're doing wrong unless they're told that they're doing wrong, right? So are we being intentional at calling out the negative and destructive actions? Yes, no, ask yourself that. You might lose some friends along the way, but if your friends and your peers are continuing to act in destructive behavior towards you and themselves and to others, specifically women, is that something that you want to surround yourself with? Maybe, maybe not, but you have to be willing to make those changes and see in the future and what impact that has on it. So kind of a long-winded answer, but embrace the process, embrace the change at an individual level, but then also you'll probably notice some changes like in yourself and who you are surrounding yourself with. Yeah.
I think, I think Brad also, in addition to what you shared, Brandon, I think really appreciating what Brad shared and what I got from it in terms of, sometimes people are well aware, and it's about not wanting to lose the privilege, not wanting to lose the status of being better than others. That's kind of what we got into last week. About, there's foundationally the bandbox is founded on, patriarchy, cissexism, heterosexism, white supremacy, a variety of different things. And, some folks don't want to give that up. I would submit that even in, well, everybody's in different places developmentally when we enter into the work, but I also do think that there's plenty of examples of how the negative of the negative impacts that are out there. And so one of the things I think about when it comes to working with West Michigan is white cisgender men in particular. So when you were talking, Brad, I was thinking about like, nobody's profiling cisgender white men. I think about the very top of the escalation of the violence pyramid, I'm sorry, that that some of us use and talk about in the work, that murder. I think about mass shootings and mass shooters who continue to be disproportionately white and cisgender males. But there's no like policy around that. There's no profiling around that. And I think of some of my other colleagues who, and friends and people that are close. And then other just stories that I hear about are folks who are profiled at airports, who are detained at different checkpoints because of their perceived or actual participation in religious traditions that aren't Christian. And so, I mean, I think about the differences in how protesters for Black Lives Matter are received and not welcome, but engaged by law enforcement versus lots of white crowds and a lot of, again, like white men, like say when Michigan State loses a football team or football game or at other sporting events, and how that's like, I think there are plenty of like examples that point to the need for, we really need to focus on, specifically in a lot of ways, cisgender men as an overarching like major part of this work. But why don't we want to do that is because to do that would mean, I think, and Brad, I really think you laid it out, at least for me, looking in the mirror and acknowledging that there's a problem with the oppressor. And so that's a difficult thing to do because it challenges everything that the Man Box and many of and all of the institutions really that we participate in are founded on. And so I will acknowledge that there are some folks who are just coming into this information and they don't know, but then I'll also say that, some folks are well aware of the impact, and that's another area of work that we need to engage in as well. Even in talking to other men in my own attempted advocacy and allyship, white cisgender men have been some of the hardest to reach about this stuff. Again, it's like that looking in the mirror piece. So no, I just appreciated that. And again, like just holding the complications, thinking about like our own spheres of influence and recognizing that it takes things at the personal level, but then also, y'all, there's just a lot of information that points very specifically at who we can really focus on here. With a lot of the violence prevention work. And it's not also, in saying that isn't removing any of my own implications in that, but that's just, West Michigan, it's something that we have to continue to be able to acknowledge and work on, so.
I guess my thoughts, how to get men to the table. First, always works a lot better if you provide food. Food works wonders. So you can kind of get them through the door with pizza, and then we can talk about, hey, let's talk about healthy manhood. So yeah, food. Definitely get food if you're going to work with men. Then my second point, and someone in the chat kind of specified this as well. One thing is that men need to bring other men to the conversations. White people need to bring other white people. True for all conversations about privilege systems. And so, yeah, the hardest men to reach in this conversation, like you were saying, Rolando, is that white cisgendered guy. And what I have learned and is if you are going to have these conversations, you have to be very intentional on how you talk to your audience, right? Me coming as a white cisgendered male, I'm not going to relate to everybody in the audience, right? My experiences of manhood and experiences growing up don't look the exact same as someone else's. And so that's where the piece of you got to listen first and then speak. So listen to the experience of whoever you're having that conversation with. Listen to them, listen to their experiences, their thoughts, their emotions, their pretty much everything. And then from there, you can kind of say, you know what, I had a different experience, but fundamentally it all came from the man box. It all stems from the man box. It might have looked different on the outside, but realistically, the rules and expectations in the man box are there. And that's what we kind of talk about. And so it's building that trust, building that relationship. So if they open up to me and they're vulnerable with me, I'm going to be open and vulnerable with them. And so that's what I have found to work, no matter who I'm talking to, is just the fact of, if I buy into you and buy into your journey of breaking down the man box, you're going to buy into what I'm kind of saying too. Listen to understand instead of listening just to respond, right? And that goes into the skill set of being an ally. And so and to kind of tie back to what we were talking about before, what are the obstacles that men face when they want to be an ally? When they looked in the mirror, they saw their privilege, they saw the more negative aspects of the man box, they saw the benefits of this oppressive system. Now they want to be an ally. What are the roadblocks? What are the obstacles facing them when they do want to put in the work? Quick answer, being attacked. Yeah. I don't know if you meant verbally or physically, but for sure, yeah. If you go against the man box and you put yourself out there and you start to give power to the marginalized, you give up your power and you fight against that system, you're attacked. Absolutely. And that could be from getting yelled at to even beaten up to whatever, for sure.
Yeah, this is Jaime again. One of the things that I found in my own experience is when I got to the point where I wanted to take some action, first there's nowhere to go. So if you're looking for like to plug into something that exists, I mean, I live in San Jose, California, and it's a big city and lots of things going on, but I literally could not figure out where do I go to join something that exists already, because I didn't know how to do it myself. And so I think lots of guys will find themselves in that situation as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's just the lack of what Rolando was saying a couple weeks ago, that lack of support, right? The lack of groups of men having these conversations. A lot of guys I talk to want to do the work. They want to be an ally, but they just don't know where to go. They don't know where to go. They don't know what questions to ask. So they're looking, but there's just nothing. Yeah, great point. And so I want to bring into this conversation the ecologic model. Ecologic model. There we go. And so that's essentially a model of prevention that looks at what areas in your life can you be a positive influence, be an ally. And so there is the individual sphere, which is, looking yourself in that mirror. It's coming to terms with the privilege and bias you have. And then you go to the step up, which is relational, which is friends, family, other social networks. And then you go up another level, and that's community. So that's neighborhoods, maybe your workplace, schools, maybe a church. And then the final level is societal. And those are the systemic institutions. Those are the cultural norms, the policies, right? And what I like to do is when guys don't know where to go, or they don't know what to do or how to be an ally, I bring up this model and I say, okay, think about on an individual level, how can you be an ally? Okay, now on a relational level, how can you be an ally? On a community level, what does that look like? And then finally, as a societal level, what does that look like? And so this helps guys really see where they can fit in and they can be an ally. Because it's overwhelming to first hear about this and be so energized and so ready to be an ally that you don't know what to do. And so this model really allows, or at least it helped me figure out where I fit, where my allyship can go, like what direction it can go. Kind of like what Brandon was saying earlier, allyship looks different for everybody. It could mean you read a few books and you really look introspectively, or it can mean you're starting to change policies at work, starting to change policies in a school, or it can just mean you call out your friends for sexist remarks, or it looks like what we do with the call to action team. Look at a community level. How can we bring this message to the community? And so that's what I like to use, because a lot of guys can see themselves fitting in those 4 levels. And so I know that helps visualize how men can be an ally and how they can fit in to, the joint effort of talking about gender issues and talking about the man box. And so I guess my next question is, how can you, just looking at the first 2 in, individual and talking in a relational aspect, how can you show up and be an ally in those two realms?
As I look at that image, and I also believe that that's a great way to sort of frame it, like where do you fit in, right? But I think that at looking at that that image, that graph or chart, whatever you want to call it, is that in order to have, you know, if we go to the biggest circle, the societal circle, you can't make societal change without having positive community relationships, positive interpersonal relationships, and positive individual connections, right? Like you don't just get to like jump to that, right? So everything is a piece of the puzzle. But for me, in the individual way, I've I'll make donations to the communities that need them, just like on a regular basis, as a somewhat regular basis, not just because, you know, I'll support local as much as I can, because a dollar spent at a local business or a local company is money well spent, especially if it's in a community that I'm living in, or, you know, surrounding. I will continue educating myself, whether it's books, whether it's literature, whether it's attending trainings, going on webinars. I will do that wholeheartedly. Not just recently. I've pretty much, I don't want to say always been that way, but especially in the last 10-15 years, you know, seen what allyship and just trying to better, trying to like provide and empower and challenge people to become better. As far as the second level, the relationship level, is I will be as intentional as I can at surrounding myself with not just like-minded people, but to safely engage in conversation with people who have a different mindset, have different beliefs, have different morals, have, you know, a different a different worldview, because that's part of my education, right? My way of doing things is not the right way for everybody. It's the right way for me, I believe, but it is definitely not the only way. And if we're just surrounding ourselves, I believe that if you're surrounding yourselves with just similarly minded people, that you are missing you're missing a lot of information. But that's just me. So that's where I see myself fitting in those first two aspects.
Thank you. Other thoughts, Brad, Rolando?
Yeah, I think Brandon said some really great things there. So I'm just going to like add another layer. For me, you know, the person is political is something that I learned in my undergrad. And that politics is something that we're very uncomfortable with. We don't like to talk about it. There's a lot of feelings that get brought up, but the person is political. So it's a one way we can bridge the personal and the individual with the societal, by understanding that we have responsibility, we have power if we vote, if we call and write our senators and legislators, if we raise awareness, if we campaign. There's a lot of things that we can do personally that can impact our community. We have that ability. And I think for a lot of people, either, you know, we don't really learn about candidates. Maybe we just, you know, go with the flow, what we see. We don't dig too deep. We don't have conversations about politics because we don't want to step on each other's toes. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. But our political system holds these systems up. It protects them. It perpetuates them. So understanding that we have a political responsibility, that we have to get engaged, we have to learn, we have to act, we have to campaign. That's a really important way that we can be an ally, is by getting political, learning about what do these candidates really represent? What are they really going to do? Is this system working? If not, what's another system that we can advocate for and raise awareness so that we can, get closer to this goal. So for me, being political, understanding that that is really important, that it's comes with a lot of weight, it impacts so many people. That's really important for me.
Yep, all the things that that Brandon and Brad have shared, all of those things. I stay in the I'm very much in the education space day to day, so I found that's one of the main areas in which I've been able to have some influence, supporting folks and including myself in examining like the media that we consume, from song lyrics to movies and music and a lot of different things. Focusing a lot on athletics as an intentional space to do some capacity building around teaching about teaching and learning on violence prevention work, because there are a lot of things that happen, at least in my experience in the athletic space, that it's for me, I've seen is a prime space to really delve deeply into some of these issues, and just recognize. I think someone else mentioned in the chat, standing out and being attacked. It's been helpful for me to try to stay focused on recognizing that any discomfort that I feel in regards to this issue is temporary compared to the folks who experience this on a day-to-day, being on the other side of it, not benefiting from it like I do. So I would just co-sign many of the things that Brandon and Brad have shared so far.
I love that. Taking a look, that uncomfortableness and being attacked is only a fraction of what the other side is dealing with and is feeling. I think when it comes to individual level and like relationship level, I think a big thing for me personally is consistency. And I struggled with this a lot when I first got this job here at Resilience and first started to realize what an ally really means. And so consistency is a big word. And so if we want to be an ally and we want to stand out and we want to call out sexist jokes and comments, we can't pick and choose when we can do it. That's what I've realized. And obviously safety is number one. So if you feel unsafe, don't do it. But that being said, I am a white, cisgendered, able-bodied male. So I can talk to and call out more people without feeling unsafe. And so what I've struggled with is sometimes after a really long day of having these hard conversations, I would come home, my roommates would say a sexist joke or be rating a girl, and I'd just be too tired to deal with it that day. And I just let it slide. And so I've had to learn that kind of what Jaime was saying is most guys don't have these conversations. I have had these conversations. So it's my responsibility to start those conversations with other guys, to bring what I've learned about the man box, I've learned about allyship to the guys who haven't had these conversations. And so that means when I hear something, I call it out, no matter how tired I am, no matter how mentally exhausted I am. It's kind of my responsibility to help teach these guys that that's an unhealthy way of looking at life. And so, yeah, consistency is key for me, is because, and it's just because if, you're talking the talk and not walking the walk, no one's going to take you seriously. Right. And so you need to be walking the walk most of the time. And if you slip up, well, you better hold yourself accountable or hold others accountable. So yeah, consistency, I think, is the main kind of thing in those first two. And then moving up a level, what about in your community? How can you be an ally? How can you be a male ally in your community? So church community, neighborhood, workplace.
So one of the things that so I'm not explicitly involved in religious, particularly Christian spaces at this point in my life as a practitioner or as a person who practices, but being raised in the specific context that I was in, every every time I get the opportunity, and then also initiating those conversations, particularly with other men around hierarchy and the challenges in that. So I had this picture on my phone um, that it's backwards and might not be able to read it. Some of you all might be familiar with this kind of a diagram, but it's and I also, apologize for folks whom this may be triggering to hear about. But it has a particular order of what family is supposed to be, at least in my own context, in terms of things that I was presented with. So the very top of the umbrella, there's Christ there. Underneath it, it says husband, and it's protect family, lead the family, provide for family. Underneath that, it says wife, comfort, teach, and nurture, and then children, like obey your parents. And so it's a very hierarchical thing that really drilled in, at least in the context of my own socialization, that men had a very particular role. And I've seen that play out in really, really negative ways, not just with me, but even some of the folks that I've worked with over the years. So I spent a lot of time really with folks really interrogating that model and asking, what are the results of that? Protect and provide, that puts I spent a lot of time too working with folks who, okay, so maybe there's a bill that we can't pay for, but wait a minute, the man is supposed to be able to do all these things. And in the context of some of the work that I've done, I was talking about last time, sometimes when folks are feeling powerless and they don't have the tools and that, and everything that the man box teaches us, want to do something that feels powerful. And I think hierarchical things like that really empower or create conditions for physical violence or emotional violence to continue. So a part of my own practice in terms of that community piece, and I think Seth, you mentioned like religious institutions and that, is really talking to other folks about this and asking about the results of it. What are the results of that? And also, is everybody on the same page about that? Is that really something that everyone is buying into? It's a lot of pressure to buy into that, but building capacity among folks who that's not true for them, or they've seen challenges with that hierarchical establishment of what family is supposed to look like, which is also heteronormative in a lot of other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you said a lot of people have those questions and have those thoughts of like, is this really the right way to do things? Why is it set up like that? And so if you're starting to ask those questions, you can kind of take comfort in other people are probably asking the same questions. It's just, how do we create a space where we can talk about that stuff, right? Any other thoughts, Brad, Brandon?
Yeah, I'll quick chime in here. So understanding that we're all in different spaces, mentally, physically, emotionally, I am quite fortunate that in the work that I do, part of what I do, I have the opportunity, I view it as an opportunity to engage with third, fourth, and fifth grade boys in usually it's a 9-week program where we meet twice a week, and it's across, for those familiar with Michigan, if you're not, we look like a hand, right? So along the lake shore, we do that. That's the state of Michigan right there, the Lower Peninsula. So in this program, without getting too much into it, we implement the part of the Live Respect curriculum, which is meant for middle schoolers, and these are third, fourth, and fifth grade boys, but educate early education. We're working with a prevention model, so it's all good, right? So we are implementing in that program, like, call out the behaviors. Now, these 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old boys, they don't know that they're doing anything wrong, right? They're doing it because they've seen it, right? They're demonstrating what they have seen from who they consider their role models, who they're surrounding them with. But if I'm at that school and I hear it, I will call that out. Not to be like, hey, you're wrong, but like, hey, what did you mean by telling your classmate, your teammate, that he runs like a girl? And then 99.9% of the time, it's, I have no idea what the heck I meant. I just said it because nobody's told me that it was wrong. So in that short interaction, right, like, it's not, hey, you're in trouble. It's, hey, well, let me actually think through it. Let me, the young boy, like, actually process it and be like, I don't know why the heck I said that, right? And then have a conversation with him and be like, hey, did you ever think of what that actually meant? And let them say the words and work through it. It is, like, so rewarding. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen again, but like, in that moment, it's like, yeah, I truly understand you. And to have small conversations with those, to me, is very easy. Like, right, if you do it with positive intent and you do it with grace and empathy, you're not saying you did this wrong and I want to get you in trouble. It's, hey, you're 9 years old and you don't know the meaning of this. Let's talk about it, right? And then if I come back to the same school, they're like, you were the one guy who called me out on that. I remember you. And, building some rapport with them. But like, little interactions like that is a huge, simple way to be an ally, to, in this case, the young boys, because, and hopefully give them a sense of what healthy manhood is, right? Like, it is disrespectful, it is demeaning to say to your peer that you run like a girl, you throw like a girl, or to use derogatory language towards them. It's not on you because you picked that up from somewhere. It's more on them, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But yeah, so that's how I see myself being an ally at a community level. What was pretty much every day, but obviously it's changed over the past 4 months. But like, take advantage, use those opportunities to your advantage. I implore, yes.
Awesome. I like how it doesn't have to be, let's gather in a big group. It can be those small interactions. Yeah. Thanks. Thoughts, Brad, or would you like to dive into how can you be an ally in a societal sense? Because I know you're a big systemic thinker. So
It's my jam. I just want to appreciate Brandon and Rolando, some really great points. And I can kind of blend community and society here. And just kind of point out something that we've kind of brushed over a few times here and there. I know Rolando really mentioned earlier, kind of about the agenda and how important it is that, especially people that look like me, white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied men, that we don't seek to go into spaces that have been built by diverse and marginalized folks. That we don't seek to go into there and have our voices be heard, so we can feel like, hey, we're part of this movement too, because then we start to take over. Our voice is heard all the time, anyways. So it's not about going into those really safe spaces and thrusting ourselves in there and having our voices heard, but can we use the platform that we have, the privilege that we already have, and engage people in that way? So like Brandon talking about in his work, the amazing work that he does. And Seth, you and I, we work at Resilience, which is an agency for domestic and sexual violence. And so we're very intentional about when we're in this space, what are we saying? How are we saying? Are we trying to lead? Are we trying to dictate discussion and have an agenda? Or are we doing the work in the background? Are we having conversations with each other? Are we focusing on not taking over, but being very thankful for this space, recognizing the pain, the hardship that it took for people to build this space, and respecting that, I think is really, really important in a community way. So it's really important that you're aware, that you're intentional, that you want to be a part of this movement, which is a beautiful thing. But how are you doing that? What does that look like? Are you taking over? Are you perpetuating the man box? Or are you doing the work in a way that's safe for everybody, that's respectful, that's not about saving other people or being seen as an ally, but about true transformational change from within? If that's your agenda, then I think some beautiful things can happen.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And this kind of drives me to my next point. And if they want to be an ally, I forget who created it, but yeah, perfect. It's the men's accountability wheel. So as an ally, you can look at this wheel and it kind of paints a pretty clear picture of what male allyship looks like. And so we actually have it here, and it's like support organizations like Resilience or women's anti-violence groups, work collaboratively, like Brad was saying, is don't go in there with an agenda and have your voice be the loudest in the room, right? Don't play into the man box. Also, welcome suspicion. I forget who specified that. I think it was Rolando earlier, but people are going to be skeptical when you say, yeah, I'm an ally, right? And welcome it. Say, that's fine. I'm going to show you that I'm not here just to say I'm a good guy, I'm an ally, right? I'm actually going to put in the work in the background. Also be open to learning. Just because 2 years ago I started to really realize what an ally looks like, that doesn't mean I have it all figured out. I'm going to slip up, and when I do, I'm going to learn from that. And so the one I really appreciate in this wheel is seek women's guidance. They have been the leaders in especially gender issues forever. And so as men, if we are going to be allies, we're not going to just come in and just take over, right? That's what you were kind of saying, Brad, is we're not here to take over. We're here to learn and to walk alongside and do the work in the background. But we do have that power and privilege that allows us to get into spaces that were otherwise not available. And so we also have some comments, little interactions, small conversations. It makes me happy to hear that. I try to challenge harmful behaviors in this way with male peers. Yeah, so it's a small conversations. But working on becoming an ally does not mean women owe you friendship, sex, or anything, right? Unfortunately, I hear just awful stories of men claiming that they're allies in order for that to happen. And I just, I love it. Or applause. Yes. Whenever I tell someone, this is what I do. I talk to guys about these issues. They're always like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And I'm like, don't thank me. I'm just a normal dude who respects women. It's nothing to applaud. It's a very fundamental thing everybody should be doing. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And so before we kind of go further, I know I'm going to plug the Call to Action team. So it's a team of men in the West Michigan community at Resilience that helps develop workshops and tools for men who are asking these questions. So we're trying to provide those spaces for men in the West Michigan community. And so, yeah, Leslie put our link to our call to action booklet. So this booklet right here, the call to action team developed, and it's essentially like how to be a male ally 101. And so it answers a lot of those questions, or at least hopefully does. And so that's an awesome resource. We're also working on developing a Healthy Manhood 101 training. So like a 3-hour workshop, as well as we're developing, or at least hopefully we will soon develop, a kind of a small group. I don't know if we're going to call it a workshop, but just, I don't want to call it a support group, but essentially it's a group of guys that get together and they have these authentic and vulnerable conversations. And so if you are wanting to know more about that, please feel free to email me. Yeah. Oh, a couple more plugs before I get to our final question. August 19th, we will have a virtual coaches clinic. So we're going to be talking about programs like Live Respect, programs that have these kind of conversations with high school athletes, as well as athletes as leaders, so male athletes and female athletes. And so that is August 19th. If you want more information, please email me. And then August 27th, we are having a coordinated community response team meeting. That'll be our first meeting. And that is a subcommittee of community members who want to push the Engaging Men movement forward here in West Michigan. Because a lot of organizations are already doing Engaging Men work, but no one is actually talking amongst one another. And so what that will hopefully accomplish is create an Engaging Men support system throughout the community. So that is August 27th. And like I said, if you want more information, please feel free to email me. Also, I almost forgot about this. We have a evaluation survey that we would love for you all to fill out. And yeah, awesome. There's a lot of links. Thank you, Leslie. But yeah, if you have any questions before we wrap up, please let us know.
This is Jaime. I got one real quick. Maybe I shouldn't be asking now to close, but what do you guys think? Is it too much of a cop-out to take an approach where actually we use the tenets of patriarchy to introduce guys to this work? So specifically what I'm thinking about is like one of the roles in patriarchy is to be the protector of women and kids, right? And I was thinking, well, it never makes sense to engage men in the call to, you could cite some of the statistics about, like, actually I don't remember what they are, but the gross number of percentage of women that actually have experience with sexual assault or rape, and like to enlist men to like prevent their own children from being assaulted or raped. You know what I mean? And so use that as the call to action, but then also weave in the broader discussion about patriarchy. Is that too much of a cop-out?
Any thoughts? I know I have a few, but if you have some. No. I think realistically, because it is so hard to get guys in the door, I think providing that as a way to get guys into the door is okay. But as long as you work within that to start having those deeper conversations. And I don't want to say we're tricking guys, but I think working into this selfishness of the man box and the patriarchy and the protector roles that we're all supposed to be taught, I think that's one strategy to get them through the door. I know we've talked about like providing a new fatherhood class, right? Here's how you become the best dad you can be. And then once we have them in the door, then we can slide in, hey, let's talk about if your kid doesn't want to do sports or they want to do choir and whatnot, how are we going to handle that? So I think personally it's okay to use those kind of strategies to get them into the door. That being said, we have to be very intentional on bringing it back to, the more negative aspects of the man box, the more negative aspect, or just abolishing the patriarchy within those conversations. So I know I think it's fine, but that's just my thoughts, because it is hard to get guys through the door without playing into the system a little bit. Thoughts, Brad? I saw you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's really complex, and I think we hear that a lot. The protector role. I've also heard like, would you talk to your mother that way, or you have a sister? But again, it's kind of defining women as existing in relationship to men, and that's all of this is about abolishing. It's a revolution. It's not a reform. So we, like you said, we have to be very intentional about that. And also, I just want to elevate again Rolando's point early today when he talked about that savior complex. And I think that's really interwoven in the man box, this idea of I'm going to be an ally so that I can save people. I can put on my superhero cape and I can rescue everyone and feel good about myself. When in reality, the people that need to be saved, like, it's us. Like, we are in this prison. It's toxic. It's eating away at us from the inside, and we just refuse to see it. And so I think that's another way that we can present that to men. It's not about being a savior for other people, but it's about helping yourself, your own mental health, your own relationships, right? You're setting fires all around you and you don't have to. And so maybe if more men understood that, they might be more interested in having this conversation too.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. So, yeah, we have 2 minutes left. So I just want to thank all of you main speakers. So Brandon, Brad, Rolando, thank you for lending your voice to the conversation. Thank you all for providing your thoughts in the chat. It was a great conversation today, and I think it was a really good one to end on. And so thanks for being here for the last conversation. It's been fun. Please go to resiliencemi.org if you want to hear the rest of them, or if you want to see outlines of these kind of guided conversations. So if you want to take these conversations and facilitate them in your own, relationships, please feel free to do so. And like I said, you have my email. So if you have any questions, or do you want any resources, or you just want to talk more about this stuff, just let me know. I'm kind of an open book, and I would love to talk to you about this more. I love talking about these issues and how men can be involved, and the man box and its consequences and all that stuff. So yeah, thanks again, and have a great and healthy weekend. Awesome. All right, see ya.